What's up guys, Chris here, and I'm back doing another Power Rankings video. If you don't know what the Power Rankings are, it is where I go through the current teams of the GBA and I say who I think is doing the best in the league at the moment, who I think has the best playoff chances, who is making good moves, who is improving, all that sort of stuff. It is not, and I repeat, not just me reciting the stats of the week and things like that. If you just want to know where teams stand based off of wins, loss, and differential, you should check out the weekly recap that goes up on Saturdays. This is entirely opinion-based. It has virtually no scientific backing at all, and I just make it up off the top of my head based off what I feel is important that week. So, get ready to be mad that your favorite team isn't where you think they should be. That's part of the fun, and you guys are more than welcome and encouraged to leave comments below and tell me where you think everybody should be. Post your own list, or just pick mine apart like most people do. It's all good fun. That being said, one additional thing to add this week. If you don't know already, you don't follow people on Twitter. Joe, coach of the Pittsburgh Steelix, has quit the league. So factoring that in, I didn't put the Steelix anywhere on the list. New coach is taking over next week. It's the Sorkinist. He is changing the team to the Milwaukee Timberwolves, and there isn't really a point in throwing them on there because we don't know how good Sork's going to do at everything. We don't really know, how ready he is for the team and stuff like that. So it's just the top 15 teams this week. No one's taking that 16th spot this week. That being said, we're going to go ahead and jump into it as best we can. Okay, guys, starting at the bottom, number 15, the one, the only Nexus. I hate to have to put Nexus at the bottom of the list again so early in the season, but 0-2, and you don't bring a check to a incredibly threatening Mega. In Standard, Mega Venusaur's lost a lot of notability and usage just because of the influx of other Megas and scary things like Mega Gallade, Mega Metagross, etc., etc. But Mega Venusaur is still a problem. If your team doesn't have something for it, it's going to be a problem. We've seen that every season of the GBA. Behind the scenes, I can tell you, usually most teams in the past have had a problem planning for it. Everybody has to dedicate something or multiple things and coverage slots to taking it down. Nexus had the opportunity and the advantage of having Moltres. Moltres is kind of a perfect thing to take him down. And the oversight of not bringing it bit him in the butt. And, that's why he's going to be at the bottom. 2 big losses, and, the first one was a fairly close match, and it could have gone, either way had people made different plays. This one was just straight up bad planning. He gave Tom an absolute free, unstoppable win condition, and then it won. There's really no excuse or no logistics for that. So, unfortunately, Nexus very early in the season is going to go down to the bottom of the list, which for this week is 15. Number 14 on the list is going to be the Denver Bronzongs. They are still 0-2, but not by nearly the differential loss of Nexus, and not even by the differential loss of some other people who have wins under their belt at this point. And Roger did absolutely go up against a big threat this week in Nick. I don't think a lot of people had money riding on Roger and the Bronzongs to win it, to be fair. Expansion teams are at a very obvious disadvantage this season. They're going to have to make a lot of plays as far as trades go and use their one free agency pick very well to bounce back. But that being said, Roger still has some very good tools on his team. He's one of the few teams with a lot of speed and the potential ability to, outspeed some stuff on Nick's team. That being said, Roger lost. I'm not sure if it's there yet for Roger is the thing, and that's going to be the reason it holds him back. Roger is very knowledgeable about the game, but it just seems like the playmaking isn't necessarily going to be there. He brought some fun, cool stuff like Magnet Rise, Lucario, things like that. So he's definitely getting out of the comfort box of standard and really trying to get the most out of his team. Unfortunately, it may just not be enough to click. And factor that in with the fact that, a narrow loss against Nick is a little bit more deceiving. Scores don't really always tell the story of the match in a lot of ways. Sometimes they very much do. Sometimes they're incredibly straightforward. And there's a couple of those this week. But sometimes they don't. A narrow win against Nick doesn't really mean a lot because that's just how Nick plays. Nick does not play for differential. He doesn't have a problem sacking things off. So, Roger getting kills doesn't necessarily mean that Roger was making a lot of great plays and that it was a close game. It just kind of means Nick, sacked off the things he knew he didn't need to win and then still won in the end. So that being said, Roger's gonna have to win at some point if he wants to move up, or he's gonna be duking it out with Nessus for the bottom. Number 13 on the list is going to be A-Drive and the St. Louis Rampardos. They beat Joe on the way out as it stands. Didn't have the best matchup in the world and very easily could have lost the match had some things not go for them and go their way. But things did go their way, and that's part of the game. There are a couple of iffy plays, and, Dan definitely had some fortune, and Joe didn't have the Mega Bangle, so he didn't have Mega Beedrill. But, Dan still made some good plays that I really liked this season. I'm not necessarily going to give him the credit for the poison jab on Heatran bluffing the Scarf, because I don't think that Joe really bought into that. But I will absolutely give him credit for sacking the Venusaur early, or sacking Charizard Y early to ensure that Sun couldn't be used against him because the threat of Heatran was still around. You could make the argument that he could have just straight brought Chestnut in at that point, but actually ensuring that there's no way there was going to be a roar to bring Sun in or anything like that, and that Heatran wasn't going to be able to OHKO that Chestnut really did actually end up mattering, and it was the right play to make at the time, I think, at least. Dan showed that he could just kind of bring some fairly normal sets and still do. He doesn't have to throw people off with mixed Charizard Y with Dragon Dance and stuff like that. So that's cool. That's enough for me to bump him up a little bit and, to hope to see more cool things and just solid plays out of him as the season goes on. Number 12 is the Milwaukee Sawsbucks. They kind of move up by default of there not being another team up in the way. They lost to Cooper. They lost a very close match to Cooper. Things could have gone a little bit differently, but there were good plays all around. Steve was not totally outclassed. He very rarely is. That's kind of the thing about the Sawsbucks. Even when they're losing, they're still pretty much always in it until the end, and a lot of times the end can swing your way. Fortunately for Steve, the end has not swung his way this season. He is 0-2. But, there's still room for things to swing his way for him to get back in the game and to claw things up. I think he's going to have to seriously look at the trades and lighten up on some of his consistent weaknesses throughout the team, shared weaknesses. He's got a few. That being said, though, Steve's pretty decent at the trade game. He likes to have fun. Free agency is going to come up. He could get something really good out of that to, catch people off guard and to, fix the puzzle that is his team. Kind of pull the pieces together is a better way to say it, I suppose. But that being said, right now, Steve's struggling. He's a little bit low. Not the worst team in the league, but not the best. And with wins going out to everyone else in his division this week except for him, he's really going to have to turn it around and start pulling out some better wins soon if he wants to stay in the playoff race. Number 11 is going to go to the Los Angeles Nido Kings. Pretty much their spot for right now. Lost a fairly, fairly decisive loss here, especially when you factor in Fizz made a lot of outside of game mistakes as far as sets and items and things like that. if you can't beat somebody that's 2 items down and running the wrong moves on their stuff that they planned for, I'm not going to throw you super high. That being said, I think Danza is very much still in it. 11 is not the graveyard of all things. There's still a lot of room for him to move up and around. And he will. I'm sure he will. So there's not too much to go into there. Danza is going to be at number 11. Not the worst of the worst, but definitely should be aiming to go up in the future weeks. Number 10 goes to the Real Maril Mega Mogwai here. Hello, Internet. I dropped Miguel down 1 a little bit, mostly just for the fact that he has taken his loss very hard. You see it in the video as he's losing and as things are falling apart. I think it's really shaken his confidence in his team. And I'm not necessarily sure that that's the right thing for him. I think he does have a good team. I think he has a better team than he's giving credit for after that loss. I think, he came in with a very rigid game plan of standard and what win conditions are and things like that. And that's more or less what bit him in the ass. Things like, the fact that in standard you very rarely, if ever, will see a defog Togekiss, and as soon as he saw Skarmory wasn't there, he kind of wrote off defog and thought, suicide hazard leads was enough to get him there. But that being said, Miguel's still an incredibly great player. I think he's still got a very good team. I think he will learn from the things he did. I think, Miguel's very good at isolating his mistakes even during the match, let alone after the match. He's one of those people who doesn't need the comment section to tell him everything he did wrong, even though his comment section loves to tell him everything he did wrong. And I think, you're not going to see him go in with as much of a one-ticket game plan as he has in the past. You're going to see him experiment and get a little bit crazy, and hopefully it works for him, It is still a somewhat new format to him, even though the D-League season happened. The D-League season was probably not the most representative thing of the GBA format. In retrospect, I think we're probably going to change some things up for that next season. But, Miguel took his loss well, and I think it's going to be interesting to see where it puts him. He did lose, and it definitely was bits of the team falling apart. Maybe could have saved a little bit of differential had he played some parts better, but the loss was always going to happen. And, that's going to be enough to put him at the number 10 spot and holding the barrier at double digits, unfortunately. Number 9 is going to go to the Anaheim Mighty Ducklets. I moved them up, and he lost. Everybody riot. Everybody go crazy. I'm not following the stats. Who knows what this could mean? Anarchy, chaos, cats and dogs living together. What will happen to the world? I moved Adam up because Adam actually took John to the mats, John, who was one of the big, bad, scary guys last season, but, maybe not so much this season. He's still got a lot of great, big, scary things. And the fact that Adam was able to pull out a handful of surprise things and bop John here and there really says a testament to the fact that Adam can game plan and Adam can play the game. If he can get some trades going and move some pieces around, I think the Ducklets are definitely, not playoff bound necessarily, but are in a strong position to do well for themselves in their first season in the league. Number 8, the Meteoric Rise and Ascent of Cooper Kishiro and the Utah Jasmine. Cooper's just a good player. Cooper's got a much better team than he had last year. He is playing the format a lot better than he's playing last year. Took Cote all the way down to the mats, and, he managed to pull out another win on Steve. He is, I believe, career undefeated against the Milwaukee Sawsbucks at this point, which is pretty cool. I expect to see Cooper do very well this season. I'm still not necessarily sure he's a playoff team, and that's why he's a little bit on the lower side right there on the threshold in the middle. but he definitely has the room to prove it. And, with Joe not coaching his team anymore, the doors are open for him to definitely be the number one seed in his division, actually. So you could see him from the playoffs. Depends on how well the new coach takes over the roster and manages to do with things like that. But expect to see things out of Cooper. Great 4 Whimsicott kills. Good to see that poke finally getting used and getting some good kills in there. So that being said, it's fairly standard. Like I said, Cooper winning a very good match that he needed to win. A very narrow loss to an incredibly tough foe. So that pretty much balances out, really, and puts him in the middle, leaning a little towards moving up to the front in the future. Number 7, a little bitty drop, not too much of a drop, but enough, is going to be Shady Penguin. You could argue that he should be dropped fairly hard because he did get 6-0'd this week, and he did, get 2 weeks into the season before realizing his highest base speed is now base 100. And that's the thing I noticed during the draft, and I really was surprised when he didn't draft faster things. But I still like his draft, and I still like his team. I think he's got a lot of good value on his team that he can make some trades. He's got some decent free agency options going on, too. And again, Shady is just a good player. He's a solid player. A lot of people, like I said, look down or dismiss his abilities, but the man's a competitor, and he shows up, and he gets some wins. I expect to see him do well. I think middle of the pack is probably a consistent rating for him. And you'll probably see him float around in this range quite a lot. But that being said, a 6-0 loss is bad. To his credit, I will say he did have a couple of good, little gotcha items. He did bring the freeze dry Mammo, which is probably a must at this point against Cote's team. And he did have Giga Drain on Tentacruel. Unfortunately, he never got either of them into a position where they could actually kill Manaphy because he needed to have prior damage on them consistently. And Cote made the plays such that it never had consistent damage on them before. And, he could keep outspeeding. So the game planning wasn't too bad outside of overlooking, the tremendous base speed issue. But, as far as sets and things like that go, it's definitely, I think, actually a step up from what we've seen from him past seasons. I think he did a better job of it this season than he's done in the past a lot. And I think you'll see a bit more of that. If he can round out his roster problems, I think he's looking good. There is definitely room for him to go up on this list. Number 6 is the man with the plan. The Tower of Power, too sweet to be sour. Fizzy Stardust, the Atlanta Haluchas. Expect to see them go up because I have a feeling Fizz is going to win some things. And week 3 is going to be a really big tell for him. Arguably, I could have put Fizz higher, actually, because Fizz's win this week was really good. Not, you can look at it on paper and say, okay, Fizz has an incredibly good team. You can look at the matchup and say, okay, he has a good matchup. You can look at his opponent and say, okay, Danza hasn't had a very good season last season and, may not be the most threatening person. But the thing you really need to notice is the fact that Fizz didn't bring 2 items on Pokemon accidentally. It wasn't an intentional, knockoff reduction plan. It was purely an accident. He came in with only 4 items. He came in with the wrong move on a Keldeo, and he came in with the wrong hidden power, and he still won by a decisive margin. That's pretty good. Obviously, it would be better to win with the right stuff, and that's going to be a thing that, he's going to need to look out for. Expect to see him double and triple checking things a lot more throughout the season. Hopefully, we will never see an incorrect hidden power from him, but at least unlike last season, it didn't result in a demoralizing loss, and this week it just won in a holy shit, he actually still win, which is good enough. So yeah, I guess maybe I'm holding Fizz back a little bit for that. The fact that he still makes little silly goofs, but you got to give the man credit and you got to give the man respect for still pulling off the win despite that. The Haluchas front office is putting in some great game plan work, and Fizz is making the right plays in the match, and that's your keys to success. I expect to move Fizz up in the coming weeks, especially if he manages to beat Cote in week 3. That being said, right now, number 6, I think, is a respectable spot for him. The slow climb, dramatic improvement from last season. We'll see how it keeps going and if the Haluchas can keep rising. Number 5 is Tom and the San Jose Sharpedos. This is a pretty big move up. You'll have to factor in that, all of the spots, again, got moved up because of the loss of a team, so everything past number 3 pretty much got a free bump up. But Tom does move up off a solid win. He used his team correctly. He came in. Nessus did not have what he needed to have to stop him, so Tom swept him, and that's absolutely how you should play it. And as I have said before, Tom just has a scary, threatening team. When he plays the team right, and when the cards fall in such a way that, he has the opportunity, as long as he keeps playing it right, he should have huge numbers like this all season. There's absolutely no reason for him not to. He has the pieces enough that he can potentially bring, multiple win conditions a week. He doesn't necessarily just have to rely on one strong thing. Tom just has a lot of great players. So that being said, Tom is at number 5. We will see how he holds up later on as he goes against better and better people. If he can keep pulling off big wins, he'll keep staying up and potentially go higher. If he can't, we'll see some drops, but that's for Tom to decide, really. Number 4, this is probably going to be the big controversial one of the week, and it's going to be the one I catch all the flack for. The man won, and I'm moving him down 2 spots. John, a.k.a. Pokemon, coach of the New Orleans Pelicans, is number 4. He was number 2 last week. He won, so I kicked him down 2 spots. Deal with it, John boy. I'm just kidding. John doesn't actually even watch these. He won't even know what place he's at, let alone leave a comment, and that's okay. So here's why I moved John down. John barely beat Adam. Adam has a very noticeably expansion team. His team's very weak as far as base stat totals, speeds, and things like that. And on top of it, John has all the priority in the world on his team. There's very little reason he shouldn't be OHKOing and 2-hit KOing a lot of things. And John still managed to get surprised by a couple of things like, Vileplume, etc., etc. John's approach to the format is just to not get swept by certain things, and I'm not sure that strategy is going to work all the time. I think it works when you prepare for the right thing, but when you go into a match saying, I'm not going to get swept by an Ursa Ring, I think maybe there should have been some other strategies involved. That being said, he in fact did not get swept by an Ursa Ring, which is probably because it wasn't really brought, but, he did still win, and that's obviously not to take any credit away from him, but I think, a frustrating loss to Nick and a win over an expansion team when you were the number 2 team last season, coupled with the fact that while I think he had a good draft from a synergy standpoint, he's definitely lost some power and degraded over the seasons, but, I think the components may not be there for John to quite be the number 1 seed that he is for his division, as opposed to some other people. And John's really going to have to show that the ragtag pickups and things like that were, justified, and that his standings last season weren't because he inherited a crazy good team, and that he can do it all on his own. So, I'm going to throw him down at number 4 and put the pressure on him to do better. He'll say he doesn't care, but deep down he does. And everybody should let him know that he's a number 4 team, and that's just kind of depressing. And he really needs to go hard because, number 4, Number 3 is the underwater terror himself, Cote, the Toronto Maple Leafeons. A lot of people probably expect him to be number 1. I know Cote thinks he's number 1, and he is a very scary team. But again, a 6-0 sweep on a team that has literally nothing that outspeeds your primary sweeper is just a sign that you drafted better than people and that they drafted poorly. Cote made the right plays, though. I'm not going to discredit him in that regard at all. He's an amazing player, and he makes solid plays. He reads the situations right. He knows when to bring things in and set them up to secure the wins. He knows his calcs and what he needs to be at to OHKO versus 2-hit KOs. And, it's hard to say that he's not the number one team, but at this point, he's not quite. He's still got to manage to knock the block off a couple of the big guns throughout the season to really prove that he's there. If he manages to, take Tom to the mat, I believe he placed Tom later on in the season. If he manages to take Nick down, if he manages to take Gubs down consistently, then Cote's probably going to shoot up. Or if he just keeps destroying every other team he plays all seasons, that's obviously also going to be a very telling factor about whether or not Cote is not just the premier ranked team in the league, but potentially the premier team in the league. As of right now, he's in contention. He's obviously a master baller. He was on the precipice of it last week, and there really was very little reason not to put him there, but I did, and it was funny, so I'm okay with it. This week he is there. Like I said, he still has to prove that he can topple bigger threats than what he's been taking on. So if he does that, you're going to see him move up. As it stands right now, though, number 3 is solid. It's a good spot. So that's where he lands. Number 2, and I bet people still aren't going to be happy with this, but Gubstacular, coach of the Arizona Deoxys, is number 2. He won, and I moved him up, guys. Isn't that just what you wanted? The system works, kind of. Here's the thing, Gubs has the best record and best differential of everybody in the league, but he's still not quite number 1 because Gubs has consistently managed to have the best win record and the best differential of every season. And at the end of the day, he still doesn't walk away with the title. That said, he is showing that he's got some good moves. Based off of some other things, just Gubs' game planning this season has really stepped up. He is really getting into people's heads and reading them pretty much exactly like the book. And that's kind of an unstoppable, terrifying thing. Pair that with the fact that he does just have a really good team and is willing to, break balls and, do hard trades that benefit him and not just give things away. And I think Gubs is a contender. The thing that's probably going to keep him out of the number 1 spot is, the perpetual victory of the number 1 contender. In addition to, Gubs getting over a couple of hurdles, he's got to prove that he can beat Cote consistently this season. He's got to prove that he can get over the mental block and just total inability to beat Danza. If he can do those, he's going to move up. But as of right now, he'll probably just keep doing, big number wins throughout the season, have a little slump, and then go back into big number wins, because that's kind of what Gubs does. At this point, it's a little bit formulaic, but, if the formula works, you go with it, and it almost works for him. Once again, the number 1 team remains the Boston Red Sox. This is fun because it's not a blowout thing. Nick doesn't have a huge differential, but he doesn't play to have a huge differential. Nick just plays to win, and he does keep winning. He has an amazingly solid team. It's so solid, it's actually really hard for him to, move any pieces around and get any better. And like I said, he's winning. He's last season's champion. He hasn't lost yet. He beat the runner-up last season. He beat an expansion team this week, which doesn't really mean that much. And you could argue that the fact that it wasn't a huge blowout like some of the other matches should, affect his standings here. But the thing is, he wins. Nick doesn't really care if, it's a 6-0 or a 1-0 as long as it's a win in the win column. And that's exactly what he's getting. And at the end of the day, that kind of is all that matters. If he can fix the problem of last season of not getting enough wins, then again, differential doesn't matter. So that being said, until Nick loses, Nick's probably going to stay at number 1, short of people just doing amazing, mind-blowing things.